As soon as the Amber Alert is finished.
Extreme alert.
Yep, there it is, FEMA.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Independent Ethics Board for the City of Tallahassee. It is Tuesday, October the 16th at 4:03. So we are amazingly close to being on time. I apologize for that. I like to be late. First thing I'd like to do, which is not on our agenda, is introduce Simone Marsteller from the Gunster firm, who is our new board attorney or counsel. She has presented to the board in the past, so some of you will remember her. She's been around Tallahassee for a bit, and I would like to recognize her to introduce herself better than I just did, and then answer any questions any board members may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have been around Tallahassee for quite a while, since 1999, in fact. I've worked for a number of agencies here in Tallahassee. I've been Secretary of Department of Business and Professional Regulation, State Chief Information Officer at the former State Technology Office, Interim Secretary at DMS. I ended my government service as a judge on Florida's First District Court of Appeal. I sat on that court for 6 years, and when I left the court at the end of 2015, I went into private law practice, and so I primarily do appellate litigation, appellate consulting, government affairs consulting, and now board counsel for the Independent Ethics Board, and I'm very happy and honored to be on your team.
Thank you. Welcome, I think, from all of us. Any members, Ms. Marsteller? Okay, seeing none, we are going to dive into this agenda. Excuse me. The first item is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any edits or corrections? Seeing none, Mr. Davis moves the approval of the minutes, and Mr. Smith seconds. I see him reaching for the microphone with his two up. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Minutes from the last meeting are approved. Then we move into the Ethics Officer report, which we will go through item by item. The first thing is the summary of activities during the last month. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As indicated on the report, you'll see the various activities that I engaged in since the last time the board met. One of those was a meeting with the incoming board counsel, and then I did have a wrap-up meeting with Mr. Currington. It was actually a transition meeting, so both were able to meet and talk through pending issues. That was quite productive. Also notable is that I did meet with the management team here at the city related to ethics education for the new commissioners and mayor who will be elected in November, and trying to get them educated pursuant to not only Florida law, but the city ethics code, which requires them to receive comprehensive ethics training within 60 days of taking office. So we're in active planning stages for that. And other than that, I'm willing to answer any questions you all may have about anything there on the list or otherwise.
Seeing no questions, the next item in your monthly report is the complaint log. Item 117, as we've noted for the last couple months, is pending the city auditor's report, which will address city P cards. So that one remains on hold since that audit is ongoing. Item 147, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
All right, in that one, that's a recommendation for closure based upon the fact that the individual was calling from Lee County I guess, thought that they were calling the Florida Commission on Ethics, and the subject matter was not something that I dealt with either. So that caller was provided with the appropriate contact information for the entities that could receive complaints. So I did recommend closure for no jurisdiction.
Okay, any objections to that? Seeing none, I want to note here that I have had a conversation or two with Mr. Sims since our last meeting about the series of complaints that he has filed with the board. And what I have done is, since Ms. Marceller is a fresh set of eyes and comes into this with no preconceived notions, I've asked her to review his complaints before the board. She has begun that review but not completed it, so I expect that we will hear something from her probably at our next meeting.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Sims, do you have any, do I need to recognize you, or? Sure, you're recognized.
My name is Stanley Sims. I'm at 1320 Avondale Way. Hold on 1 second. I apologize, I'm not that savvy. I have this stuff to make me look good, and then it ends up embarrassing me. Hello, Shannon. My name is Stanley Sims. I'd like to speak to Donald Reynolds, the executive assistant to Mr. Raul, please. Yes, my name is Stanley Sims. I've been calling about 8 months, trying to set a meeting with Raul regarding my project. And I've been also informed by others like you. Would you please kindly send an email saying that I did make this call? Thank you. Yes, 850-544-6852.
Mr. Sims, you need to move this along, please.
Right.
We're happy.
You said 5 minutes, all right? I'm not expending
I just recognize, I didn't give you a time, I just recognized you
Okay.
at the podium.
The demonstration
I expected
here.
you to be talking to us.
Okay, then, the demonstration here, ma'am, is at this very time when we have just been hit by Category 4. The greatest essential tool in our community is access to our public officials. This is a clear demonstration that I feel that my access has been restricted farther than necessary and farther than I believe that the law would allow. There are other examples of this. There is another white male who clearly demonstrated more agitated manners than I have been accused of. There's evidence to support those manners. When I presented this information to the chief, he wanted to implement the same judgment on this guy that he implemented on me, but the interim city manager told him no. There's another white male, another white female for the last 6 months who have come. I get that every time. Or I get someone is in her office, and the only way you can meet with these people is you have to have an appointment. Now, the difference between my situation and the white female, she has been given accommodations in an air-conditioned building to display signs and to voice her American democracy. I have been taking a situation and it has been used to exploit, to mandate me down into a one-room. Mr. Hearing is quite familiar with those things. Even though that the city attorney was standing right down there and watched me, and a police officer was right there who filed no report saying that I was agitated, but in less than 24 hours, I was given notice while I was in home, because I have some medical conditions as well, that my civil liberties or access to this building had been restricted because I allegedly threatened Cynthia Barber, a friend of mine for 45 years plus, where I was standing in front of the city attorney who has clearly said she did not see that occur. But I call the cops. There's an incident report with the sheriff's department that said that my restrictions were being restricted because I was going into women offices using a security card. This building has very good security and audio. There is none of that to support that, and there are no reports from any officers saying such alleged actions. Then they restricted me to I had to have, while this was going on, I was already under similar restrictions being followed by the security officer. So if these alleged actions happen, they happen in front of the security officer of the detail that I'm being followed. I'm conflicted, ma'am, because it is important for me to share this with you. I love this city. I love this city. My mom retired from the city. My wife currently works for the city. My son, who is right now in Great Lakes, I talked to him yesterday, who is going through a very difficult time there. He worked for this city. I have done numerous community projects with this city. So I'm not an enemy of combatant, and to be treated like that is very hurtful. Because just less than an hour coming here, city employee met me with water from my mom. So I don't have a bad rap here. But it doesn't feel right, Miss Simone. And I have failed to eloquate. My concern is, why can a white man who is rich cuss an officer out, dare him to move his car, disrespect him? The chief of police writes a letter and then they turn it down. And then a white female who I love, I have no problem with what she's doing, but the question remains to me, why? Because all I can point to is that I'm in a protected class, that I'm an African American. And then you say, well, why is it taking this long? Because, and this is where I'm getting very nervous, Ms. Simone, so you have to really pray for me. This is falling on you because I believe that Julie has not done her job. She is too close to these people that are involved. The people that are making these decisions have been in positions you have been into. I can give you examples. Sometimes you don't ask questions because you know the answer is not the one you want to hear. Something about this is not, it may be legal, but it doesn't feel right. According to the words of the FBI agent that I spoke to over at FDLE. For the record, I'm an ex-felon. It just doesn't justify these actions to me because I still pay taxes. He said these words to me: I don't get it. They have given you a trespassing warrant without you really violating any things. So how can a man make a determination of individuals' civil liberties in this government building if you can't just look at my situation? I'm asking you to look at it because something here is not sitting right. This is no longer about a man who is just bitter because they didn't fund his program. This has gone way beyond that. And so I'm seeking your guidance. And I've been in situations, Ms. Simone, and I'm saying your first name because I don't want to martyr your last name, is I may not like the answer, but I believe, and this board knows, what I have suffered, what my wife has suffered, and what my child has suffered. We deserve an answer because we love this city and we're not going anywhere. And I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your time, and I apologize, but I thought a demonstration could put it more eloquent than my long words. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sims. The next item on our agenda is the monthly budget update. I had a chance to talk to Ms. Meadows-Keefe. You will notice our anticipated October expenses on lines 15, 16, which are professional and legal fees, are substantially higher than normal. That is the result of our executive session last month, solely where we had a court reporter and another attorney there. So that's a spike that we will not see on a regular basis. Otherwise, it is all pretty much month-to-month expenses. I just did your spiel, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next is the public records report from the Treasurer Clerk's Office. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you want to walk us through? I think we have one that went out with the agenda and then another one, a longer version that was at the on the desk when we got here.
Well, typically, Mr. Chair, what I do is see if there are any requests that board members have particular questions about, recognizing that I don't necessarily look at the responses to these. They are sent to me, and you'll just note that there's a fair amount related to the individual that's running for statewide office.
Again, I'll remind everybody, the long list is basically everything that came in. The shorter list is the ones that the city has pulled out of the longer list as ones of that might have some interest. Often they are something that may relate to some political issue. At least that's my view of it. A couple here on the stolen bus. Does anybody have any specific questions or want Ms. Meadows-Keefe to follow up on any of these specifically for our next meeting? Seeing none, we move to the new city auditor, Mr. Malachevsky, who we have met previously, but he is going to, The city is about to do its 2019, his office is about to do its 2019 audit work plan. And because their issues and our issues have often had some overlap, he has been kind enough to come and walk us through what he's planning to do in the next year. Mr. Malachevsky, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I may have done more than I've been asked to do. I did provide some information in the form of a PowerPoint that I want to go through that will lay some background that will hopefully be informative and help you understand the approach to our audit work plan for this year, which is different than prior years. So the first thing I have here is the definition of internal auditing. We are an independent and objective advisory and consulting, or assurance and consulting service for our organization. So we do both audits to provide assurance to our board and to management, and we do consulting engagements to provide advice to them as well. We bring a systematic and disciplined approach to what we do, and we try to address three main areas. We want to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of the organization's risk management practices, their control practices, and their governance practices. So what is governance? It's the combination of processes and structures that are implemented by the board to help the board direct, to be informed, to manage and monitor the operations of the organization to the achievement of its mission and objectives. Governance impacts everything. When governance fails, everything fails. This image is provided to us by the Institute of Internal Auditors. The intent is to show the proper placement of the audit organization within an entity. If we go back to management theory, it says that management's job is to plan, organize, staff, direct, control, and monitor the organization to the achievement of its goals. They do that by implementing management controls and internal controls. This is the box on the far bottom left called the first line of defense. In a perfect world, management would do those things. They would implement directive controls like policies and plans, detective controls like reconciliations and inventories, and preventative controls like segregating incompatible duties. And that would be enough. The organization would achieve its mission. But over time, management has implemented a second line of defense. It includes things like quality programs, inspections, compliance programs, risk management functions, financial controls, and security controls. The proper place for internal audit is to be the third line of defense, with a functional reporting relationship to the governing board of the organization and an administrative reporting relationship to the management of the organization. So we have this type of reporting relationship with the City Auditor's Office to the City Commission. Our mission in the City Auditor's Office is to provide an independent, objective, and comprehensive audit program for the city operations. City Code says that the Commission appoints my position, and I serve at their pleasure. Our function was established back in 1979, and we also have a Citizen Audit Committee that's appointed by the City Commission and provides oversight both to my position and my office's operations. Here is our committee. As you can see by their smiling faces, they're happy to serve as you are, and they're very capable to serve in this capacity as well. And we have a city audit policy. This audit policy provides for the responsibilities of the audit function. It defines those to include audits and investigations of city operations. Those can be operational and programmatic type audits to ensure that what we do is done efficiently and effectively. They can be information technology audits, and they can be financial related audits. This policy requires that our work be risk-based, and we develop a risk-based audit plan, which I'll share with you today. It requires that we abide by professional auditing standards, that we have the proper authority to perform our duties, that we have access to the right documents, property, and personnel to perform and carry out our mission. It gives us direction on reporting to the Commission and to the senior management of the city. And it requires that if there are significant indicators related to matters of fraud, waste, abuse, malfeasance, misfeasance, nonfeasance, or any likelihood that a law may have been violated, that we report those to our appointed officials, to our mayor, the city commission, and when appropriate to law enforcement. The policy also requires that we do follow-up. So any items where we found that improvements could be made to city operations, corrective action plans are implemented, and we follow up and communicate to the board or the commission whether or not those corrective actions have been timely implemented. So these are the sets of professional standards that we abide by. Ironically, we call them the Red Book and the Yellow Book. Together, we're an Orange Book shop because we abide by both government auditing standards and the international professional practices for internal auditing. I often get the question, well, who audits the auditors? In our case, it's the Association of Local Government Auditors, who every 3 years performs an external quality control review of our function to ensure that we're compliant with our professional standards. Their most recent report was issued in April of 2018 for the prior 3-year period, and found that we were fully compliant with both sets of professional standards, and obviously that doesn't reflect my work, but the work of my predecessor. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the COSO, the Committee on Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. This group is very important to us as auditors and to our organization as well. It was established back in 1985, and their original purpose was to study the causal factors for fraud in financial reporting. They subsequently became thought leaders in the area of internal control, of risk management, and of fraud. So it's a joint venture of these 5 private sector organizations, and they publish a lot of documents on these topics that are helpful to auditors like myself and to organizations trying to understand what we should have in place. This is the criteria against which we can evaluate whether we're doing the right things as an organization with regard to fraud, fraud prevention, risk management, and controls. So internal controls are the processes that an organization uses. They're affected by people and intended to provide reasonable assurance that we'll meet our mission and our objectives in 3 main areas: that we'll be efficient and effective in our operation, we'll have reliable financial and other reporting, and we'll be compliant with applicable laws and regulations. I've shared with Julie the COSO Cube. On its face, we have the 5 components of internal control that COSO gives us, and I have a handout to go with this. I'll walk that around now.
Thank you, sir.
Joe?
So the handout also shows you the COSO cube with the 5 components on the face of the cube. It also shows that there are 17 principles defined by COSO for implementing these 5 components of internal control. The first component is establishing a proper control environment. And the slide that I have projected shows the 5 principles associated with the control environment under COSO. So by way of example, the first component on control environment and the first principle is that the organization should demonstrate a commitment to integrity and ethical values. As auditors, we would use the COSO document and look for certain points that the organization would have in place. So here the focal points that they highlight are we would look to see that the organization has set a proper tone at the top, that they've established standards of conduct, that they evaluate employees' adherence to those standards, and that they address deviations in a timely manner. So that's just one of the principles and some of the focal points we would be looking for that are all contained in COSO. All right, so with that as a backdrop, I wanted to talk about the annual plan, and I believe it was provided to you in your materials. Our plan, as I mentioned, is risk-based. We balance the plan to our available audit resources. We have 7 positions in my office, and we program 10,920 hours to audit projects in the year. We do set aside 700 hours for special projects and requests that we might receive from senior management or the commission or others. We don't want to allocate all our time to projects and not be able to be responsive. Our plan has been approved by the Audit Committee and the City Commission, which is part of the requirement of our charter. The plan includes audits that are in process, new audit projects, follow-up, as I mentioned, for corrective action plans on all prior audits, and also some internal office projects. So we develop our plan in place, in part, based on a risk assessment. Our audit staff look at the various functions and the organization of the city, and they evaluate these risk factors, the financial impact of that part of the organization, the strength of management, whether they're tenured or new, or if we have any additional information that might speak to that, the sensitivity with regard to public relations of that function, whether we are aware of any noncompliance, corruption, or fraud, or the risk that those might occur in that particular unit, the complexity of the activity, and the risk to the public welfare that might be present. We also solicit input from a wide variety of constituents, senior management, staff throughout the organization, our city commission, and citizen groups as well. So these are the audits that are in progress that are in our plan for this year. I've moved 2 of those to the top and highlighted them, understanding that they're of interest to this board. The first of those 2 is the City Hiring and Promotional Practices Audit. The field work for this audit is complete, and a draft report has been prepared and will be presented in the next week or 2 to management, depending on schedules. We will receive any feedback from management, which may warrant us undertaking additional work. I think that's an unlikely possibility. I think we're done with our work. So we would hope to, having received management's feedback, be able to move to publishing the report to management and the commission in the near future. The second project here is the P-card purchases of selected departments, and as many of you know, that was initiated based upon a call to the hotline related to purchasing card transactions of Star Metro. So that was the first organizational unit that we've looked at P-cards for. The field work for that, likewise, is complete, and a draft work has been prepared. A report has been prepared. Did I say repaired? It was in good condition when I got it. That report will likewise go through a management review process to receive any additional feedback and then be published once we get that feedback. This slide shows the current year's new projects, and I've likewise moved to the top 2 projects I thought you might be interested in. The first relates to culture and ethics. Professional audit standards require that we periodically look at the culture of our organization and its ethical environment and make an assessment. This has been done in the past by my predecessor, Sam McCall, who issued an audit on this topic in 2009. I have a copy of it here. We're happy to provide it if you don't already have a copy of it. And we have a follow-up report as well that was done in December of 2009. There was one follow-up. The overall results of this audit, they concluded that the city had the components for a strong ethics and compliance program, including a code of ethics, oversight of and compliance for ethical behavior, training, reporting of violations, employees' annual review of the code of ethics and critical policies, and transparency and accountability regarding the use of public funds. They did make 2 recommendations for the city at that time that were confirmed to be implemented as of December 2009. Those were first to enhance communication with employees regarding ethical reporting of information, and second, to formalize the city's financial disclosure processes. So both those things were addressed. But as you well know, the organization and structure related to ethics within the city is very different today than it was in 2009. So we felt it was important to undertake another audit of the topic, and we did believe it would be of use to your board as well. The second topic here isn't really an audit, and it's something that I've discussed with Julie as well, is the need to, well, first of all, let me say, I'm confident if any issue comes into the hotline that requires my office's attention, I will know about it. Julie and I have open and routine communications. We've often worked with her office and initiated projects based upon information that comes in through the hotline. But we want to make sure that there are protocols in place that are formal, that will live beyond Julie and I. So we want to do a project where we look at what type of information may come into the hotline, who might have jurisdiction over that information, and how to make sure we have the proper protocols in place to document and follow up and demonstrate proper action for all complaints that come in. There are a number of other projects on the list. A lot of them relate to governance, which is why I went through the effort of talking about COSO and discussing governance. And this is what's different about this audit work plan than prior work plans. Prior work plans, I think, focused more specifically on transactional issues. Our P cards, do we have proper documentation and authorization for those transactions? Were they for a proper purpose? Did we dot the I's and cross the T's? And that's great audit work to do and provides significant assurance. But as I said, if governance fails, everything fails. So if governance is strong, everything will be stronger. That's why we chose to look at governance as a theme for the year in various areas: policy, cybersecurity, budgeting, risk management, performance metrics, internal controls. So all these topics we hope to do during this year, and then do a roll-up governance report to speak to the strength of governance across the organization. So that's the information I had for you. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the topics on the list.
Any questions? You recognize me.
Yes, you mentioned that there's I think a city commission policy where, depending upon what your audit results determine, you may forward information to various departments or divisions or even law enforcement. Was that a city commission policy or an ordinance? Do you know?
It's a city commission policy.
Okay.
It's called the audit policy, so it requires, if we have reasonable cause to believe that a crime might be committed, might have been committed, that we report that to law enforcement, likely Tallahassee PD.
I guess my question would be, with that policy, does it address in any way a requirement for you to report anything to the ethics board?
I don't believe so. I think it predated the existence of the ethics board.
So would it be, in your opinion, appropriate that, you might discover some things that are under the purview of the ethics board. Do you believe it would be appropriate for that policy to include another provision that would have you report to the ethics board as well, or, in the right circumstance?
Well, I think about that in two ways. One, every report that we publish is a public record. We post it to our website, in addition to the distribution to management and the commission. We want to make sure it gets in the hands of those that are charged with governance and can take action to correct the issue first and foremost, but we're also about accountability and transparency. So we want it available to the public and anybody else who might be interested. So I certainly view this board as another interested party. What my misgiving would be is I wouldn't want it to appear that I have two oversight boards. I have an audit committee that I report to. I'm happy to be open and share every bit of information we have. I'm certain we can include language in the policy about reporting information and issues to the board when appropriate, and I'm certainly open to do that. I do have a little sensitivity to this board being viewed as another oversight board for the audit function, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? I have one on this slide. You have investigations as one of your new projects. Can you tell us what that means?
So my policy gives us authority to initiate and conduct investigations. In the past, my predecessors have done that routinely when it's required, but they call them audit inquiries and do the work to audit standards. I'm used to coming from an environment that does investigative work to a set of professional standards associated with investigations, like the Association of Inspectors General standards for investigations. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has a set of professional standards for investigations. I've created a set for the university system that's probably more comprehensive than both of those sets of standards. I wanted to make sure that when we undertake investigative work that we meet those standards that require us to plan, document, and report out on our work, that there's supervision of it along the way, that we're competent to undertake the work that we undertake, those type of standards. And my feeling was if any other entity within city government is receiving complaints and conducting investigations, I just want to understand what their jurisdiction is, what type of investigations they perform, to what set of standards, what's the volume of work. I feel like investigations like audits are a review of last resort often. So we want to make sure that any entity within the city government that is doing investigations into complaints of any form is doing them to an appropriate set of standards and a level of professionalism.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Norstall, you're welcome to jump in on anything that you want. Don't feel like you have to be recognized or anything. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
for having
it.
me.
We look forward to continuing to work with your office.
Likewise.
The next thing, and this is not on our agenda, it was on the desks. Our ethics officer pointed out to me that recently that we have on this next ballot the issue of changing the appointing authority for our seventh member, which has been something that's been on our radar for quite some time, since it just helps to have a seventh member in terms of quorums and diversity and a wide variety of things, but also that we have a long ballot this time, and that our little issue may get lost in a long list of constitutional amendments and other things. She suggested that she might do what do you call these, Ms. Meadowskeef?
They were calling them My Views. I think they're called something else now. But basically, they're just more publicized letters to the editor.
Okay, so why don't you tell us what you have, this was her recommendation, and I agreed with her that it was worth us taking a look at. So she's got a draft here for us to look at. So why don't you explain to us what this attempts to do, please?
Okay, it's not a work of art, number one. I'm given that disclaimer. I did that today. You'll recall back, I think it was Mr. Davis's suggestion that we do one of these type documents at the beginning of this calendar year, and the objective of that was to educate the public on the activities of the board. That often it seemed like citizens didn't know what the board was doing and how regularly it functioned and its accomplishments. So with the board's assent, we drafted that, and that got published and was well received. So it occurred to me probably early this morning that we have a long ballot in November, and I keep hearing about this thing called ballot fatigue, and I did finally see a draft ballot for, city races, and the ballot is long, and unfortunately, there are actually two ethics-related issues on that ballot. One is a Leon County-related ordinance adopting a code of ethics, and then there's our question, which seems pretty granular, to allow the public defender to make an appointment to this board so that we can finally, after several years, have our 7 members. So having said all that, I approached the chair about, I think it's important now to educate the public on this charter amendment ballot language, and that it's important for the public to engage on the issue. We cannot say whether they should vote yes or no. We can simply educate. So that was the objective of this piece. And it's simply to advise that since voters did resoundingly approve the formation of this board in 2014, it had specific requirements for the board that the public was led to believe would exist. One was that there'd be 7 members, and we've had several Chief Circuit judges who have, and this is familiar to all of you, cited to Florida Judicial Advisory Committee opinion, and so it was the recommendation of this board to the commission that the public defender be the appointing authority for the 7th member, logic being that there's a state attorney appointee. It would be balanced to have the public defender make that appointment. So the commission voted. The language that's there in the document in front of you will be on the ballot. And again, you have to get through all the constitutional amendment language, and it's second from the bottom. And I know I've heard people say they're voting no on everything all the way down, and so I thought it was important to distinguish this from the other language that's there on the ballot. So I have no pride in authorship. This was constructed within about 45 minutes today. So any comments, editorial suggestions, I'm happy to receive. But having said that, I do want to get this to the Democrat quickly, because the time is coming up for elections. I also did talk with Ms. Wills about upcoming League of Women Voter events where I can go and talk about this. And so I'm going to be looking at actually also reporters that I know doing brief informational bites on this and why it's there. So.
Okay, first, do any of the board members have any strong feelings about doing a My View?
Fine with me.
All right. Let's do this. Let's, and does anybody have any, I personally would take out a few of the bigger words in this. I think we could probably get it a few sentences shorter and improve its score on a readability scale.
That's great.
But otherwise, if it's okay, what I'd like to do is just have anybody give any edits to Ms. Meadows-Keefe, and she can continue to refine it, and then send it in. I agree with her that we shouldn't ask anyone to vote any particular way. We should just ask them to vote knowingly on this issue. I think pointing out that we recommended it is not a problem, since that's public record, publicly documented.
Mr. Chair, can we have Julie send us a Word version of this so we can, work on it that way?
Absolutely. I look forward to you dissecting it for me. I already know what's coming. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, there's a task for you to finish. The The next item on our agenda is our blue sky. We're a little behind where I'd hoped to be on our next potential set of recommendations. Remember, these will address recommendations to the city for possible ordinance changes, recommendations to the city for possible policy changes, even possible changes to the charter, and recommendations to ourselves for things that we might be able to do by our own internal policies and procedures. So what I want to do is delay this till next month, and what we will do next month is try to divvy this up so that everybody gets a hunk of it to look at, and then come back in December with each of you making recommendations in specific areas, with obviously everyone free to make recommendations on all of them. If you want to add anything, one thing that occurred to me after last month is we know that Chapter 112 prohibits a complaint being filed against a candidate within 30 days of an election. It occurred to me that for our purposes, someone could file a complaint with us 31 days before an election, knowing that our next meeting was a week before the election, and have us discussing an issue involving a candidate right before an election, which certainly violates the intent, I think, of the law. So what I'd like Julie to add to this is something for us to consider in terms of our policies, to say that we would not hear any complaint, regardless of when it was filed. We would not hear it within 30 or 45 days, if it involves a candidate, within 30 or 45 days of the election, so that someone could not game the system by filing a complaint more than 30 days out, knowing that we would have to consider the complaint within the 30-day window, which obviously puts us right in the political process where I think none of us want to be. So, again, anything like that you have, you can announce it in a meeting, you can send it to Julie. Next month, we're going to divvy some things up. I may ask Ms. Meadows-Keefe if she'll take a stab at putting this into 6 buckets, our blue sky list into 6 buckets for us.
And assign a bucket to each person?
Well, that, or if people, she can have don't assign them to people, we just have 6 possible buckets, and then if anybody comes in with say, I'd like to do these things, we'll give them theirs, and if nobody has any preferences, we'll just draw straws for buckets.
Okay.
That meets with everyone's approval? Okay. Next on the list is our ethics moment. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, this is something we've seen before going on in Georgia. So you want to give us the nickel tour?
The nickel tour, and actually this dovetails sort of well with the discussion of the editorial that I'm going to try to draft with board member help. And I saw a grin from Mr. Smith because we know his long and storied history with the DeKalb County Ethics Board, serving as its chair for several years. And it's a storied contrast, really, to the board we have here, in that, from my brief review of all this, it's been continually challenged, both financially and legally. And here, there is a Supreme Court case where there was a challenge to the composition of the board based on the Constitution of the state of Georgia, and problematic for the court was that several members of the board were appointed by non-governmental entities. So there was Agnes Scott College, Columbia Theological Seminary, Leadership DeKalb, which I think is probably like Leadership Tallahassee here. So some of these were not government entities making the appointments. So on that basis, and upon review of the Constitution, the court basically said that there needed to be a different constitution for that board, and that there were constitutional limitations on who could be appointed. And I think the reason is you want public accountability for those appointing authorities that are appointing members to the board. So this is not a concern for this board. Of course, Mr. Herring was calling me immediately going, gosh, we do have 2 university appointees on the board, but Florida has a different structure for its public state university system. So there is the requisite, and I think Mr. Malachewski could talk about that too, that there is that public accountability in the university system. And it was interesting when the commission was talking about appointing authorities for the 7th member, there was discussion of things like Tallahassee Bar, various associations, Leadership Tallahassee, and all of those were discarded in favor of the Public Defender's Office, and it turns out that was probably a good choice for us to make. And so there was also included in the materials an article that talked about it and its broad and far-reaching impact. And I actually looked at it today. So now there is an organized effort to invalidate prior actions taken by the board during the time when it was unconstitutionally comprised. So it continues to be embattled. And I don't know, Mr. Smith, if you've continued to follow it, if you have any other comments.
I found it interesting. Prior to 2015, the commissioners, the county commissioner and the DeKalb County CEO appointed members to the board, and that was the makeup when I was on the board. They didn't have these non-governmental entities appointing individuals. I always get tickled when I see who brought the case, former Commissioner Sutton. She actually had quite a few ethics complaints filed against her. And so I think she's actually former commissioner as a result of some of those complaints. So that's what I'm trying to invalidate. But it's interesting because they thought they were doing something that would make the board better at the time, because commissioners simply would not reappoint members. So we couldn't, like my last year, I think we were only able to hear one complaint because we couldn't have a quorum, because people, their term limits had expired. And so if you thought that you may have a complaint against you, or you knew one had already been filed, you simply would not appoint a member, so the Board of Ethics could not meet. And so they tried to get around that by removing that, the fact that the commissioners could appoint people, and they wound up doing something that was unconstitutional. So I guess they couldn't win for losing. So it's very interesting. Now I noticed from the article and from that they may not invalidate, because I think someone still had to appoint them. I mean, I think they were recommended from those other entities, and then so they would still have to be appointed by a governmental official. So that may be the only thing that keeps those prior cases valid.
Mr. Holland.
I just have a couple questions. One, I read the opinion from the Georgia Supreme Court in the article, and I think that we have some similarities in board structure to what was going on in Georgia. And I know that we don't have the exact same constitution that they have in Georgia, and apparently there's some very specific language in the Georgia Constitution that was at least one basis for this ruling. I'm wondering if it might be appropriate for us to ask our board counsel to look at the issue in light of Florida's Constitution to see whether there is whether we are in this same ballpark or not. Because it looks to be really a reasonably complicated issue that would require some digging to really understand. And I'm just concerned because if we I don't think we should ignore it and just assume that what we're going to do going forward is always going to be okay if, in fact, we are aware of precedent out of a similar circumstance that, could impact us. So I would like to see the Board Council do some more thorough analysis of our Constitution versus Georgia Constitution and whether or not we have the same issues or not.
Okay. Any objection to that assignment? Okay, you have work to do for us.
Very good.
And obviously, you'll tell us when you're ready on any of these things. I don't think we have on this one is not a time critical, but
Okay.
at your convenience. I think that's a great recommendation. We do have, one of the other things I thought about was we have obviously 2 board members appointed by the board, but that's the board acting as a public body. So I don't think I think even in Georgia, we would pass muster with those.
Mr. Chair, a lot of what they were talking about in this opinion had to do with whether the people that were appointing the members were elected or not.
Right. And
And
we
so-
clearly are not an elected territory.
We're not elected, so that was a concern of mine.
Yeah, and I don't think they had anyone approving them. It's like these outside groups would simply say, you're the person to be on the board. I think here you can get around it as long as another group has to approve you. Like these other non-governmental entities recommend, but the approval has to be by our government.
So how does it work now for us? I mean, so FAMU appointed you,
Right.
but did the city commission then have to approve that?
No, that'll
No,
be the issue.
that's why we're
That's
independent, so.
And I think I'll speak for the drafters, if I may, but I think that was intentional, that they were trying to spread the appointments around among a bunch of people so that the majority of the board members would not specifically be appointed by the city.
No, I completely understand it. I just, reading this opinion says, oops,
Right.
maybe there's some constitutional issue.
Right. And certainly the state constitutions are pretty different, but I think it's wise for us to be cautious. Since we've now discussed it in public, it'd be good for us to know our answer as opposed to George's answer.
Yeah.
Next is the executive session debriefing. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Mr. Chair, I put this on the agenda simply because, I don't know what you recall about the discussion, but if there was any topics, and now I'm putting you on the spot, that you believe were discussed in that executive session that perhaps we need to talk about, and maybe we can put this into November if you'd like, so I can have a chance to give you the transcript of the session.
Yeah, I've not seen the transcript. There were, and you warned us, I remember, at 1 or 2 points that we might be wandering off the topic and into broader material that ought to be discussed in public. So let's do that.
Okay.
You and I will go through the transcript.
Perfect.
And if there was anything said in there that could have also been said in a public meeting, we will correct that at our November meeting. I think we talked about maybe pursuing a couple things. Mr. Holloman.
I'm just, if we didn't find probable cause, then all the, so everything it was confidential, remained confidential, so the transcript remains confidential as well. Is that,
No,
no?
it's now public.
Oh, the transcript is public?
Yeah, it's all public. Everything's public now.
So everything
Yeah.
we discussed has been done, is in the public. What we want to do is make sure that if there was anything in there where we discussed, well, maybe the board should, in the future should go down a particular path or should pursue a particular policy or whatever, that we want to, one, close the loop and make sure we follow up on any of the board members' good ideas, and two, we want to discuss those in a public meeting rather than have a transcript of a non-public meeting. But
So I'll have that in November.
we will do that, and I'm happy. You and I can each do that independently and then compare notes.
Okay. And I can send the transcript to each board member if board members want to, and I think I probably will go ahead and do that, if
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, as long as you
Okay.
have it as a Word document.
Yes.
Just kidding.
A Word document? No,
I'm
no,
just
it's a
kidding. I know.
PDF,
I know
Mr.
you
Holloman.
You
I'm
don't want it to be a Word document. That was a poor attempt at humor. We had on last month's agenda this response from Mr. Goad. Remember, we wrote a letter to the city thanking them for their attention to ethics issues. There have been a lot of, we wanted to take, while we have dinged them on a number of things that we thought were on the borders of ethics, we did want to compliment them on many of the actions they've taken concerning training, and particularly mandatory training, and the variety of people that they've brought in to energize city employees thinking about ethics issues. And this was just his response, thanking us for thanking him.
Yep.
And that's something that I believe we should, look for opportunities to be positive, because we certainly look for opportunities to suggest improvements. Next is you all remember we did a couple months ago the ethics officer evaluation, and it was long and detailed and I won't say painful, but compared to a couple of days without electricity, I'd have probably taken without electricity. So it's just it was the form of the evaluation. It wasn't you. So what we have here is a much abbreviated form, about a page and a half or so, that would be easier to fill out and could be done. It gets rid of some of the things that just didn't really make sense in terms of the work that Ms. Meadows-Keefe does. So what I'd like to do is ask everybody to review this before the next meeting, come in with any suggestions, and we will do whatever edits or send them to Julie in between now and the next meeting, and we will clean it up and use a short form for her evaluation. Also, so without objection on that. Any comments from a member of the public? I'm seeing a head shaking. No. Unlike me, when your head shakes, it doesn't rattle. From the board members, does anyone need anything, or would anyone like to see anything on next month's agenda that we have not talked about? We've already talked about several things that will pop up. Seeing none. Public comment on agenda or non-agenda items? Seeing none. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, November 20th at 4 o'clock here in the City Commission chamber. And with that, without any further comment, we are adjourned.